All right, why don't we begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. So, can you guys hear me okay? Because I can hear myself. Okay. So, we're continuing this class on kind of apologetics, but it's apologetics against kind of the cultural war against religion. And so start with this story. So I go and teach like 2 or 3 classes, 2 classes a semester at BK. So I feel really bad because in this class I kind of got derailed because one of the students said, well, religion causes more wars than anything else. And we got into kind of this side argument about that. But these are BK students, and the majority of the class says, oh, yeah, most religion causes most of the war. So I get into this argument that that's factually not true. And then they made the mistake of saying, well, yes, one of their teachers told them that. Well, so a little problem with me is when I get angry, literally my brain shuts down. And I will do the stupidest things when I'm angry. Well, I can do them without being angry, but it's 100% guaranteed. So once they said that, I was hot. So after class, I found the teacher. He didn't even know who I was. I didn't know who he was. And I was just so angry. And I walked into his classroom. It hadn't started yet. They're just settling down. He says, look at this face. My name is Father Len McMillan, and I'm going to send you a letter. Afterwards, after I calmed down, I was like, why did I do that? But the thing about it is, this is something so repeated, that religion causes war, that it's not examined or questioned. And many people, especially younger people, believe that it's true, despite the lack of evidence. There's all these memes, I couldn't pull it up today, but there's all these memes, not only that religion is violent, religion is evil, but also religion starts wars. Now, that's just propaganda. It's not logic. And like, there was this famous writer who's Catholic who she writes theological books, and she's in this taxi cab in London, and she said, you know what I hate is when they ask me, what do you do for a job? And she says, oh, I'm a Catholic writer. And she's immediately, the taxi cab driver goes off on, religion causes more wars than anything else. It declares that religion is responsible for violence in the world, that religion kills people for dogmatic beliefs, for having any dogmatic beliefs. And yet, the people that say that will turn around immediately and with equal dogmatic force say that religion causes violence. But there's actually there is, I shouldn't say that. That goes against the facts. But the subtext is that if we could get rid of religion and faith, then there'd be this utopia. If without religion, there'd be no reason for anybody ever to fight again. Now, is that even logical? I mean, even I know but it's a well-marketed lie. The atheist Sam Harris, in his book, The End of Faith, said that religion is the most prolific source of violence in our history, quote. And Sam Harris is smart. He's the one who started the phrase, religion is evil. And in it, he says we might actually have to execute some religious people because they're so stuck in their ways. Now think about it. He just said religion causes violence, and we may have to kill some of them. He's a secular fundamentalist, but he's as bad as an extreme Islamic fundamentalist. He speaks down to religious people the same pious hubris of condescension that you get from religious evangelicals. He says faith causes misery, quote unquote, but then advocates executing religious people. It's not faith that messes up the world, it's fundamentalism. And Sam Harris is a fundamentalist atheist. Richard Dawkins, another one, likes using the refrain, religion leads to violence. And he has this book, and after 400 pages of saying that he has thoroughly examined religion scientifically, he said that religion has done no good for humanity. Yes, religion has actually committed some violence and greed. I won't argue that, taking the Lord's name in vain. But let me get this right. He examined religion scientifically and said, quote, it has not done any good for humanity. Where are these atheist food banks and hospitals? We've done, yes, we've had thousands and thousands of saints that gave up everything in their life to start schools and hospitals. Over a 2,000-year history, we have thousands of them that helped the poor, helped start education, cared for the sick. Where are the thousand of atheists who've done that? Richard Dawkins even says, and I mentioned this, that Mother Teresa is a pretend saint, that she was all doing it for publicity. Well, I tell you what, you go work in a ghetto for a while. But he calls her Hell's Angel. And they will not admit that religion has done any good for anybody. Not even Mother Teresa's done any good. They only present religion as a pathology. Well, and they also like this false paradigm that either you're religious or scientific. All the great scientists really have been religious. But I can come up with a lot of things, bad things that science has done. Napalm, nuclear bombs, chemical warfare. I don't think science leads to violence. Science can be misused for evil. Richard Dawkins asserts that all religious religion leads to evil. That's just a misuse. So what would be the evidence that disproves this? So one, historical statistics. Religion is actually the least cause of violence in the world. And the true proofs are this. One, it's called the Pacific Standard Study, where they just calculated the vast number of wars since 1648. And of those, very, very small, statistically, had anything to do with religion. Or the really big study is in 2004, Charles Phillips and Alan Axelrod published an encyclopedia of wars. It's this 3-volume attempt to chart every human conflict, war, rebellion, revolution, from the 3 BC to the present time. And there were 1,763 wars fought in this time period. But only 123 had anything to do with religion. Or put another way, only 6.8% of all wars ever fought in recorded human history had a religious context. 6.8. This is an incredibly small figure that immediately blows apart the Sam Harris propaganda that religion causes violence. In fact, if you take it, the equation another way, you can discover that, let me start back. If you take it this way, I know this sounds horrible, but I'm going to say it. If you take out Islam of the 6.898, Islam equates for 3.2. So if you take out Islam, it's a very, very small percentage out of Buddhists, Hindus, and yes, they've had religious wars, Catholics, Christians. If you take out that, it's closer to 4 to 3%. Put another way, if there was never any concept of God or religion, 93% of all wars still would have been fought in human history. 93%. still would have been fought, even if there was no religion. So religion, yes, sometimes can be misused as a pretext and propaganda, but it's rarely do people really fight about the tenements of the faith that causes war. There's more evidence to show that politics, power, greed are the overwhelming causes of violence in the world. Third thing, just the size of wars. Well, okay, so the number of wars have not started by religion, a very tiny percent. What about the size? Does religion exacerbate the size of a war? Well, just think about this. If it hasn't increased the number, what about the size? We fought 2 world wars that had nothing to do with religion. They're the biggest wars we've had and had nothing to do with religion. So my point being, well, statistically, religion hasn't affected the number or size of wars. My other second major point is historical evidence. Atheism creates wars. So statistically, religion doesn't cause violence. Historically, atheism causes violence. Richard Dawkins, if he's right, if there's no religion, would there be no wars? Suddenly we'd be singing, around the piano of, Mamma Mia songs. No, really. Can you think, has there ever been an experiment of a country having no religion? And did that result in less violence? Well, we do have history of atheistic countries that really are not more rational or moral. In fact, atheistic countries in history have created more violence. Those who think that they get rid of religion would be this paradise may be hideously surprised if you just thought a moment about historical examples. Because you need these, because immediately, and this always comes up, just like at BK, when I mentioned, when I said that's not true, and they said, oh, look at the Spanish Inquisition. What about the Spanish Inquisition? Well, technically, the Spanish Inquisition was started by the King and Queen of Spain, Ferdinand Isabella, not the church. And it was to solidify their political powers against the growing Moors, but they did misuse religion. I won't argue that. The head of it was a Dominican. Yet, strictly in quantitative terms, the Inquisition pales into comparison of later secular atheistic violence. The Inquisition lasted for 20 years, and total, the number of people killed, and I'm not advocating the Spanish Inquisition, but the most that were executed were 2,000 in 20 years. What historical incidents have you found where they've outlawed religion, atheism is practiced, and did it lead to less violence? Well, the first one would be the French Revolution. The French Revolution basically outlawed religion. Religion was abolished, and we would worship liberty and reason. And it'd be worshipped as an atheistic state. I find this kind of fascinating. So they wanted to start a new religion based on reason. So the Virgin Mary was replaced with, quote unquote, the goddess of reason. And instead of the altar of Christ, they replaced it with the altar of reason. In 1793, the goddess of reason was enthroned on the high altar at Notre Dame Cathedral. And the altar at Notre Dame Cathedral, in stone, they etched two philosophy, the cult of reason. Instead of mass, you have the cult of reason. So revolutionary leaders made great use of such terms as credo and sacrament and sermon in their speeches. Atheism was going to be a new religion based on reason. And a new republican calendar was established in 1793 that had a 10-day work week. And it was designed so that it would make it difficult for any Catholics to celebrate the Sabbath or any saint's day. It was just written out of their calendar. So the nation took on the responsibility of the church, caring for the poor, the sick, and the oppressed. In December, the assembly began to sell off church property to the highest bidders to raise a revenue. And it wasn't religious orders that now would take care of the poor and the sick. The state would take care of everything. In February 1790, all religious orders were dissolved. Monks and nuns were forced back into private life. And there's this great line I like: no sooner had the revolutionaries rid themselves of one religion that they invented another. And the new religion was atheism and the cult of reason. And did any great utopia come about? No, what came about was genocide. Despite this new religion of reason, soon the streets of France ran in the blood of hundreds of thousands. By contrast to the 20 years of the Spanish Inquisition, 250,000 people were killed in the Vendée when peasants' revolt against the revolution was put down by Republican armies. 250,000, or over 250,000, died. And under this system, as many as 300 Frenchmen and women were executed. 1 in 50 French person was arrested. There's indisputable mass slaughter, despite the fact that there's supposedly this rational country. The evidence is, just on the French Revolution, atheism causes violence. Now, do I really think atheism causes violence? No. I think greed, power does. Does that make sense? But clearly, without religion, greed and power can run rampant. The French Revolution is our first experiment that no, atheism, do away with religion, atheism commits more violence. Can you think of another example? How about communism? Yeah, the Soviet Union. Few movements have been as single-minded in its commitment and modernization as the Bolsheviks. They're virulently hostile to religion. Yet, as Bertrand Russell observed, he traveled through Russia, talks to Lenin, and in Soviet communism, he said, began as much as a religious project as a political project. And oddly enough, it was a rerun, just on a vaster scale, of the French Revolution terror. The Soviet experiment under Mao in China. It was virulently anti-religious, and still millions were killed. Joseph Stalin, an atheist, was responsible for 15 million deaths in the Soviet Union. Mao, you don't hear this, he was responsible for almost 78 million deaths in China. That pales to the Nazis or the Spanish Inquisition. War is typically about money and power and land. And what about experiments in the 20th century? In the 20th century and the 21st century, none of the conflicts had to do with religion. Compare that against atheism, where more died under Mao and Stalin, the Khmer Rouge, all these experiments of atheism. Even Saddam Hussein, he was a secular socialist. He wasn't religious. So does that make any sense? So first evidence, statistically that's not true. Second evidence, historically, it's the opposite that's true. And when you say religion causes violence, how do you separate religion and war? Because when they say religion causes war, how do you separate religion and culture? How do you separate that? Culturally religious is not the same as devoutly religious. Culture and religion were so interwoven in human history, it doesn't mean that every political act is an extension of religion. Does that make sense? It'd be hard to separate historically religion versus culture. It's like trying to separate the vodka from a great dirty martini. You know, they just mix together. Or you could say, what about terrorism? You know, like, we live in this age of Islamic terrorists, right? Well, how much of that is religious and how much of that is cultural? Because take the Paris attacks by Al-Qaeda. The guy who carried them out was not a practicing Islam. Granted, he was Islamic and he was an Islamic terrorist, but he never practiced the religion. Terrorism is far more of a political act than it is a religious one. The ISIS leaders that are the ISIS leaders, they're just disbanded military leaders from Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist party. They were secular socialists. They were never religious. Or another example, a French hostage who was taken by ISIS for 10 months noted that his hostage takers mostly talked about politics, rarely religion. And at one point, this guy asks, he's a Frenchman, he says, let me read the Quran. And none of them had the Quran for 10 months. Or this journalist who writes for Foreign Policy magazine was held with 15 others, and their captors, they noted, never talked about religion. When the call of prayer went out, they never prayed. And when there's a call for prayer, it's deafening. Like everybody can hear it. They never stopped, even though the call was going on, to pray once. In several months, they never saw them pray. And they never saw them talk about religion. They only talked about politics. Or Robert Page, who is from the University of Chicago, did this study on all suicide bombings from 1980 to 2004 and concluded religion had a very low priority. In Lebanon in 1980, there are 35 bombings. 7 were committed by Islamic fundamentalists, 3 by Christians. The rest were seculars from Syria. It's about politics more than religion. Now, I will say that there has been this complete lack of response, not complete, almost complete lack of response from religious leaders. What one does see is that terrorism, none of the Islamic religious leaders really challenged the terrorists. That fault is part of religion. Same with the Crusades. But the Crusades were far more political than religious. Several Crusades were against fellow Catholics. They weren't fighting about doctrine. They were fighting like Venice versus Constantinople. Venice won this crusade because Constantinople was taking away their trade power. Does that make sense? That's not religious. Or the 30 Years' War. At one point you have Catholics and Protestants fighting together against other Catholics and Protestants. So yeah, there was a lot of religious violence, I will give them that. But it's far more about politics. They weren't fighting about theology. Catholics would kill Catholics in some of these wars. It's not about theology. Nationalism can be far more dangerous than religion. Now, I don't give any asylum to any religious leader for not speaking out, but then I don't give any asylum for any secular leader either. Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris say that they work by facts, and yet they promote propaganda. Like Sam Harris always says, we work by evidence. Apparently that's not so. The fact is, religion doesn't cause war, at least it's a very tiny one. Atheism is responsible for millions and millions more death than religion ever had committed. Does that make sense? Okay. I have another point, but just questions, opinions. Let me eat my donut.
I think 2 years ago, our U.S. Supreme Court declared atheism.
2 years ago, our Supreme Court declared atheism as a religion, and I'm glad about that. So he basically said atheism is a religion, has been declared by the Supreme Court, so they are right. Religion does cause violence. It's atheism. And yes, atheism is a religion. It takes far more faith to be an atheist than it does to be a Christian. But any other opinions, objections? Okay, I have to repeat what you said. I am standing up. Go ahead and stand up.
Okay. So the scientists...
That's a short joke, and I will be seeing you after class. Oh. Well, I'll open it to... But, I'm a huge fan of Andrew Newberg, who He's this neuroscientist who, he's the first one who discovered, wow, people that meditate and pray, it has all these great biological effects. People who meditate regularly, less stress hormones, better hearts, more cerebral activity in the frontal cortex. One of the healthiest things you can do, best medicine ever, is meditation. So Andrew Newberg, he's not religious. He openly admits that. He's just fascinated that, wow, meditation has all these great effects. Just amazing. The healthiest thing you can do, unites us together. He wrote the book, Why God Won't Go Away. It's not religious. The reason why God won't go away is, you'll hear atheists talk about this, that religion is just a matter of programming. You've been brainwashed into thinking religiously. Andrew Newberg, he doesn't try and prove or disprove that, because that's opinion. But what he can prove is, and I like this line where he says, it's not a matter of programming, it's hardwired. Our brains are hardwired for prayer and communion with other people. Does that make sense? So he does a great job of proving this. So meditation has all this effects. It brings us in communion with other people. Greatest thing for your health. So now what you do have, and that's what I think you're getting at, is you have these people saying, well, see, we can have kind of this, what did you call it, universalism, or, religion without religion. Well, that's an interesting thought, but once again, where's your proof? Doesn't science work by evidence and proof? We have evidence that we're hardwired to pray. That's why God won't go away. We're hardwired for communion. But what evidence do you have that, like I understand what he's saying. There's kind of this, we can have religion without religion. You have no evidence that ever works. That's just cultural theater. So I don't know, that's what I think. Does that make it especially if you study the history of religion, you have these groups that go off. And there was a TED Talk where this guy, he's not a believer, but he goes to church. But really, he's not a believer because going to church and having a community and similar morals is really good for you. So he gives this great talk proving that. But really, what it is a reflection of culture, not really belief. And I think culture, it always changes. And so if that's what you want to base a religion on, is cultural, it'll fade. Like, it's kind of like the joke, and it's a joke where, I forget the joke, but this guy goes to heaven, and in heaven he says, well, can I look at hell? And I said, sure. So he goes into one room and he said, oh, these are Catholics who desecrated the Eucharist. Like, oh wow, they are being boiled in oil. These are, Buddhists who never meditated, and they're being tortured in flames. And then he goes into this room, and it's the worst of all. People are being boiled in oil and in eternal flames. And he says, holy cow, what did these people do? He said, these were Episcopalians that used a dessert fork for the main entree. And how much of religion that's just a cultural reflection for community's sake, always tends to fade away. Though that's what I think. There's no proof. Okay, moving on. Oh, yes, Mrs. Cookie. I don't know if I set them straight, but I challenged their belief.
You haven't done this course for them?
No, but I can easily come up with the rebuttals. But no, whether they heard me or not, I don't know. But I don't really care. You need rebuttals in life. Like, more people should say, where do you get your evidence for that? Like, show me the evidence, because I can show you evidence to the extreme of the contrary. 78 million people were killed in China by an atheist.
Yet you
hear back from the professor?
No, I don't think I did. But I'm sure he just, I mean, rightfully so. Because I did send him a letter. And then I was embarrassed. Outlining all these things, but. So could you hear that? So he has, try to capitalize it. So these anthropologists will go off to the Amazon where these get to know it, and suddenly they'll have a war with somebody else. Just proof that, wow, organized religion doesn't cause, because they're not organized religion, causes violence. It's part of human nature, not organization.
Yeah, that's just the point.
So yeah, that's another good point I never thought of. Yeah, anthropologically, you do have religion without organization, and there's still violence. So, the other one I thought, and is this is my third one, so is the blame everybody else but me syndrome. That Marxist says the cause of religion is the proletariat and the exploration of, Marxists say it's property and the exploitation of the proletariat. Liberals agree that it's conservatives that cause all the problems. Conservatives agree that it's liberals and anybody who watches the Kardashians that cause most of the misery in the world. So when people say religion causes war, I think it's a poor attempt to absolve themselves of any of the contributing factor that causes misery in the world. They just don't have the moral courage to really examine the little things in their lives that build up that make war possible. Everybody else is to blame except the atheists. Does that make it like there's many, many causes of war? If you can say, well, it's all religious people, you're just absolving yourself. Does that make sense? It's not a great argument, but I like it. Another thing, my fourth is religion works on the root causes of war. So after the stats and the history, my rebuttal is that religion works on the root causes by making people examine their own sins. Now, in Catholicism, that's a big deal. We guilt our students. Now, just have to tell you a story. Guilt our children. Now, there's a difference between shame and guilt. Everybody knows that, right? Shame is over who you are. If I shame you, it's over who you are. If I guilt you, it's, Linda, you can do better. Does that make sense? So, like this year, we have endless confessions at St. Ignatius, and I decided to be nice to the younger kids and really harsh to the older kids. Like, I wanted them to feel guilt. And so, like, I was trying to urge them, look at your sins. You know, none of us are perfect. You need to take responsibility. We all need to look at our sins. And so I was giving this lecture, and this kid from St. Ignatius, he writes me a letter, and he says, I just love going to confession to you because you don't make me feel guilty. And I was like, I was trying to make you feel guilty. And there's this, I think this is funny. Now I have to go off on another story. So just little kids, even at age 2 or whatever, their personality is already set. And that just amazes me. So there's this little girl, she's in 2nd grade, her name is Emma. And so anyhow, she's leaving church one day, it's a Sunday. She's leaving church, and she hands me a note. So, and the note says, swear to God, I took a picture of it because I just love it. And the note says, Father Len, you're a good priest this year so far. Every time I see her, I feel like I'm getting graded. Anyhow, but in Catholicism, yes, we do guilt our children. We want them to examine their lives and sins. Here's the thing, atheists don't believe in sin. How can you work on the causes of war if it's always other people's sins? If atheists believe that there are no sins, how can you work on the causes of the war? Religion warns against the danger of power. It's not religion that's the problem. It's not logic that's the problem. It's the misuse of power that is one of the major causes of war. It's a human problem. It's about the dangers of power. Now, if you know who Maslow was, he's this famous psychologist. He had this interesting study. So his background, his father was a rabbi, and he gives this test to religious people. And what he found out, and this is kind of shocking, is that some people are attracted to positions of power within religion for the sake of power. They're interested in religion because they're interested in power through bureaucracy or authoritarianism or laws. It's not, you have this odd thing. It's not a quest for God, it's a quest for power. So people's religious motives may have nothing to do with spirituality. It may be about power and control. When we exercise power as if we're God, then yeah, tyranny and cruelty begin. We get Spanish Inquisitions and crusades, but atheists can be addicted to power as well. So what they found out is 6% of any hierarchical system will have sociopaths. That means government, religion, military. That's just a human condition. But at least religion limits it by saying power can be dangerous. It works on, Christianity warns against the dangers of power, and Christianity is about renunciation of power. Atheism is not at all. Atheism, you don't examine sin. Christianity is about renunciating power. Christianity preaches about the danger of power and pushes this commitment to service. Atheism doesn't. Christianity preaches the reverse. Even in the Old Testament, God always works upside down. Notice how, like the Magnificat of Mary, if you pay attention, my soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord, it's how God constantly works to turn the world completely upside down. Those who are about power and wealth, they will lose. That's Mary's Magnificat. God chooses slaves, Hebrew slaves, and the weakest in society. And at Sinai, he demands that they renounce power for a morality of love. Before the 10 Commandments, after he freed him, he says, I fell in love with you when you were a nothing people. You were powerless. I heard your sa'ak, your cry of pain. And if we're going to be married to each other, and religion is this marriage between us and God, if we're going to be married, then you have to hear the cry of pain for other people who are captives. These freed slaves and their future generations were supposed to worship the Lamb of God, this image of gentleness, not power. And they're supposed to free other people. So Christ comes in the weakest caste of society, not priest or royalty. Mary and Joseph were poor. Christ opposes the abuse of power in hierarchies. He calls them whitewashed tombs. He commissions the 12 apostles from the lowest class in society. He gathers to himself the marginalized, the rejected, and the powerless. He's crowned with thorns. Religion teaches the stranger is Christ, an image of God. Christianity is against tribalism, but it's for true community. Tribalism causes war. So God constantly advocates meekness, not power. Even Pope Francis wanted an end of clericalism. Atheism has a point that there's too much hypocrisy in religion. There's too much clericalism. I won't argue that. But those things cause people to lose their faith in God. It's not that God is for it, but there's none of that in atheism. Religion is responsible for billions of acts of goodness that outweighs the hypocrisy and clericalism. The church is supposed to be this force of justice. Read the Bible. Read James. Why start with James? Because God said he shows favor to the poor and favor to those who care for the poor. Throughout the Bible, God says the lives of the poor are precious. God advocates that those who believe in God, they take care of the weak and the vulnerable. Granted, there's those who claim to love God but do nothing to help other people. But even in the letter of James, he calls that dead faith. Jesus calls them hypocrites. The Bible says that those who are connected to God have a connection to the poor and the powerless. Atheists, on the contrast, they have no mandate to care for the weak. They're under no threat of hypocrisy if they don't care for the weak. In fact, the atheism teaches that there is no such thing as morality. There is no such thing as sin. So if atheism doesn't have a mandate to help the poor and the powerless, do you think any first world atheists who live very comfortable lives, usually in Ivy League settings, are doing anything in the poor barrios like Mother Teresa? They can call her the angel of hell, but you don't see them working. So my only point being is that, well, atheists don't believe in morality. So think about it. Atheists don't believe in morality. So how can they say war is wrong? How can they say violence is wrong? There is no such thing as morality. That's making a judgment. It's Christianity who says war and violence is wrong, and we're commissioned to stop it. So here's the thing. Even with the hypocrisy in the church, even with some leaders seeking power through Christianity, do you abandon it or go deeper? Look at Martin Luther King. When confronted with the bigotry and prejudice of white Christians, he didn't say abandon religion. He actually calls people to a deeper conversion. He calls not to abandon, but go deeper. Injustice does not become an excuse for abandoning religion. It becomes a reason for doubling down on it. When anybody says, well, look at the problems in religion, they always like to use it as an excuse to give up on religion. Why not be like Martin Luther King? Why not, if there's problems in religion, why not double down on it? Does that make sense? Okay, opinions, questions, objections? Yes. Well, you're right. I am generalizing on atheists, or I'm actually being very specific. What I'm being specific on is the atheists who say religion causes war. That is Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens. So I'm going after those who promote the propaganda, religious. So yeah, like I have a friend who's an atheist as well, who's a really good human being. But he doesn't believe religion causes war. He doesn't say things like that. He's far too logical. So you're right, I am not generalizing, I'm specificizing. I'm trying to create a word, specificizing, on those who promote this propaganda. So you're right. But I don't think all atheists don't believe that there's morality. Wait a minute, you're saying you think the press is not sticking with the facts? You think they're just trying to sell newspaper or programs? Okay, so I have to stop you there. So he said there's a book called Eternity in Their Heart, compilation of stories of Protestant missionaries who go out to primitive societies and say, but they already have a sense of the divine, and so go ahead. So the other book is Peace Child, where I didn't hear that, but two warring tribes that would occasionally offer a peace child, so they would exchange children to each other's side, just to bring about unity or peace. So this summer I want to have a class. I'm fascinated by it. Religion in the Paleolithic and Neolithic age, and just the reason why, because I know it's a weird one, but I love it. I love that subject. Because put it this way, they'll say, what about the cavemen? What did cavemen didn't have religion? Oh yeah, they did. Religion seems to be this endless part. Granted, we know just a few tiny things, but they obviously had this call to the divine. So that just seems part of human nature. And you have war that seems to be part of human nature as well. And it just reminds me of the story of, the fable of the grandmother that said to the grandchild, I have two wolves in my heart, one for hate and one for love, and they're always at war. And the grandchild says, well, which one's going to win? And the grandmother said, the wolf that I feed. You can feed whatever one you want. You didn't hear the story or what? Oh, which one will win? The one I feed. So I do have more to say, but this is more of a kind of a conclusion. Oh yes, Jane, could you stand up? What is it called? No, I saw the movie. Silence. Yes. Well, actually, I want to correct you. What they did was offer the priest a safe life. That what they found is that if you persecute the religious, it intensifies the faith. So we'll offer the priest a very comfortable life to give up the faith. And once you get the priest to kind of buy into being comfortable, then other people will lose their faith. And he writes a book because historically that's true.
Is that a true story?
It's not a true story. It's based on true events. But he was Japanese, and he was religious, and then he comes to the West and lives a very, very comfortable life and finds, oh my gosh, it's happened to me as well. So, okay, now, before I forget, I'm mentioning this even though we're not at the end of class, is, you know what I want to do next time? I mean, I always have things to say, but you know what I thought would be interesting if we did this, and this is going to be the hard part for you guys. And I mean culturally, what have you guys heard that you couldn't respond to? Religion causes more violence than anything else. And I don't mean like, there's a lot of different type of apologetics, but how about this? If you guys write down like something you've heard, like what's your response to when you say religion causes more war? What's the response to that? You guys think of it this week, email it to my secretary, and then next class I'll try and answer those, if that's okay. Okay, so one last thing is, and this is what I call the upside down kingdom. In a world of hunger and violence, what Christ offers us is an upside down kingdom. The right side kingdom, it says, build your life on power and success and wealth and safety. I'm not saying any of those things are wrong, but Christ offers us a much different kingdom on the Sermon on the Mount. No longer are these things, popularity, power, full head of hair, wealth, the cause of happiness. An upside down kingdom says they are. An upside down kingdom says those things aren't important. I couldn't decide if I should say upside down kingdom or inside kingdom. But when I say right side kingdom, I mean, all these things are important. Having the car, the house, the power. Now, there's a story in the book of Daniel. And as Babylon is falling, the king is having this feast. He's in the right side up kingdom, where, power, wealth, all this other stuff. And he's brought his concubines in and having this feast. Isn't it great to be part of this class? And the writing starts on the wall that the kingdom is about to end. The right side kingdom of living for wealth and status and power and pleasure. It's here now. It was in the time of Daniel. It is here now. But it's always about to end. The writing says on the wall, your days are numbered. Cyrus is coming. You had Babylon. The Babylonians controlled Persia. Persia revolts under this leader, Cyrus. Cyrus comes in and conquers Babylon. So the writing is always on the wall. The kingdom will always end. I'm not saying the right side up kingdom is necessarily wrong. I think success and homes and cars and security, they're good things, but we're not controlled by them. We don't prize them above everything else. So I'll give you an example. This woman, when I was a newly ordained priest, she came with this problem. And the problem is She was asked to do something immoral in her job. She was in bookkeeping. Just don't report kind of this crime, and she can keep a well-paid job. She had a well-paid job, nice house, everything. And the amazing part is she said absolutely no, and she lost her job. I think it's amazing. She's not controlled by the right side kingdom. She's controlled by the upside down kingdom. So she called the police. Now, atheism's, what I want to say is that they don't have that view of the upside down kingdom, that this kingdom is all they have. And Christ said, blessed are you now. Blessed are you now who weep. Weeping is a blessedness. It's a blessedness because your life is not dependent upon money or security. That's a blessedness now. Blessed are they when they persecute you right now. Because it says rejoice. Not, at the last judgment, well, you'll be proven right. Rejoice now because you belong to the right kingdom. Our sense of justice is not controlled by the right side up kingdom, keeping your job, security, wealth, status. So think about like Mao or Stalin. If all you believe is this kingdom right here matters, then if there's any threat, there's nothing you'll sacrifice for. You'll sacrifice other people for it. So what religion does is offer us an upside down kingdom that's more valuable. My thesis is that all you have is the right here and now of kingdom, of car and success. You'd do anything to protect it. Does that make sense? So I think it causes more violence in the world. So, all right. Well, I'll see you guys next week. Thank you for the coffee and donuts. Thank you for those who put it out.